All right, everyone, welcome. My name is David Bradshaw. I am the Assistant Director of the Graduate Center, one of the co-hosts of the ABD to PhD Writing Workshops series. The series is hosted by the Graduate Center, which I'm a part of, the Graduate and Professional Student Council, which I believe we have a couple of members here. So shout out to them. I saw you, Faze. As well as the Think Tank Writing Center and the Assistant Director for the Writing, or rather the Director for Writing for the Writing Center and Writing Support at Think Tank, Nick Synergy, will be speaking with us today and facilitating. So he'll be talking in just a moment. And then we're also supported through the Writing Skills Improvement Program through content support and other forms of outreach as well. So with that, I'm really excited to have Nick here today. He's been doing great work with the Think Tank Writing Center, including a new collaboration called the Graduate Writing Lab, which I'll drop a link to in the chat shortly as well. And with that, Nick, how about you just go ahead and take on over?
Sounds good. Hey, y'all. Like David said, thanks, David. I appreciate that. My name is Nick Synergy, and I run the Writing Center over at Think Tank. And my colleague, Jess Langenpeck, is also here, who's one of our program coordinators, who's kind of along for the ride today to kind of take a look at what these ABD to PhD workshops look like. So we've been working in this program. By the way, we're going to have a lot of conversation throughout the workshop. So if you're comfortable, it'd be super cool to turn on your camera and just jump into the conversation if you've got things to say. Don't worry about raising your hand and all that kind of stuff. And the folks in the room is wired to explode. No, the room is wired to be able to record audio or to pick up your audio, so you're able to actually participate that way too. Also, I've got the chat pulled up, so this is a great way to throw in your questions while we're going. So as I mentioned, we've been doing these ABD to PhD workshops with the Grad Center and WSIP, so that's a different group than the Think Tank, right? Writing Skills Improvement Program. For a couple of years, it's this great collaboration, and it's kind of all grad all the time in this sequence, and it's supporting folks who are generally ABD, so all but dissertation, but we've noticed that there's a lot of need for this kind of information across the whole career trajectory. So I know a lot of folks in this room and then folks who have interest in this, this series aren't ABD, and that's great. We love that you're here. Yes, the slides will be available in a couple of formats. We can definitely get it in PDF for you if you want. In-depth notes don't seem like they seem super relevant here. We're going to have a conversation about some ways of thinking about your interactions with some of your committee members today. So the more participation in that, the better. I'd love to hear kind of, what's on your mind. We've got a couple of spots to be able to do that. Quick little background on who I am and what I do. So my formal title is Assistant Director of Writing Support, and that's under Think Tank. Think Tank's this kind of umbrella of academic support services. We do a lot of undergraduate support, and then in the writing sort of part of our world here, which is what I'm in charge of, we do a lot of grad support, including a really cool new initiative that David mentioned called the Graduate Writing Lab. And we want to make sure that we touch on that before we leave here too, because I think it's an exciting thing that just started this semester and it is directly relevant to y'all. So I've been here for 3 years, even though it seems like who even knows how long we've all been here because of pandemic time. All of our hair was much shorter the last time we all met here, so that was great. Before that, I was over at Texas A&M University, and I was helping to run the Writing Center there. And kind of my little corner of that operation was to support graduate students in a particular program that was geared towards dissertating and thesis writing kinds of folks. So I've worked with a number of folks who are in that kind of boat. Lots of committees, lots of things like that. So if you got questions, what I'm going to try to do is bring to you whatever kinds of relevant experience might be helpful related to being able to produce these documents and then help. Can everybody else hear me okay? Do I need to speak up? Got a couple thumbs ups. Okay, cool. shout at me if I need to slow down or if I need to be a little bit clearer. Yeah, so I'm trying to kind of look across some of these disciplines because I've worked with students across a variety of disciplines, and bring some of those things that cross-disciplinary view can kind of help us, understand what other people are doing that you might be able to apply to yours. Any questions or concerns or anything before we get started? Okay, again, this works best if you're constantly dumping stuff into the chat, like questions and concerns and specifics or whatever, or just dropping in and shouting at me if you've got a particular question, because I want to make sure that we take these more general kinds of things and really relate it to your specifics. Cool.
I can ask a question.
Go for it.
Okay, so my question is, how do we best work with advisors who disagree on how we should do things?
Yeah, that is a great question.
They have great ideas, but if there is, I just don't know how to navigate that, as they're both mentors and you want to respect and do what they say, but if they conflict, then what's the best way to navigate that?
This is Heather, right?
Yes, it is. I'm in the midst of cooking dinner for my kids, so I have my headset on, and anyway.
That is way more important. You definitely should do that. So yeah, that's a great question. I've got 2 or 3 kind of general strategies that I'm gonna we'll use those as a way of talking about that specific situation. The way that I think I understand your question though is you've got 2 people on your committee who are strong-willed folks who have particular positions. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Is one a chair and one a committee member?
Yes.
Okay.
But one is kind of like the head of my minor, and the other is just kind of in my head for the entire duration of my doctoral work. So
right. So the hard part of this question, not that you needed this particular bit of observation, is of course that everything really hinges on the head of your committee. I mean, the head of your committee is the one that ultimately signs off on stuff, the ultimate arbiter of what is sufficient. And so ultimately it's this kind of behind the scenes political thing where you're hoping that person will actually have enough of a presence or influence to be able to help prevail upon this other person. That can be a very delicate thing though, as you again undoubtedly know. So it's a matter of trying to do a little bit of satiating both if you can, assuming that they don't have theoretical or sort of foundational conflicts. I'm going to use some of the communication stuff that we talk about to kind of come back to this particular question. So let's keep talking about it as we go through. I've got a couple of other more specific suggestions. In general, what I'm thinking would be a good kind of set of stuff to think about are these kind of broad ideas. Communication. And there are some, ways that you can do this that'll really make things a lot more difficult on you, and some ways that you can do it that'll make it a little more smooth, or a little smoother. And then also thinking about this dissertation process in terms of timeline, pretty helpful thing. And then of course, I'm gonna drop some links for resources that might be helpful to you. So here's our general situation as if you needed it explained. For those of you who are ABD, so again, by ABD, of course, we mean all but dissertation. That means you've generally gone through your comprehensive exams. You may or may not have an approved dissertation proposal, but that might be the step that you're working on, is building some kind of dissertation proposal. And this, of course, looks different between every single discipline and among advisors, even within a discipline, right? So there's going to be some variation, but a lot of the departments are the ones who are setting these kind of broad movements. One of the things that happens in this phase is that students start to feel a little bit more isolated often. And this is kind of an area of scholarship that's been sort of burgeoning recently. It's like, well, isn't it kind of funny, and by funny, I don't mean funny, but sad, that there's a lot of support potentially in a lot of departments, not everyone, but a lot of departments right up until that point when they kind of let loose to go do the thing that they're supposed to do, which is write their dissertation, right? And then all of a sudden that support just kind of evaporates. I had a really interesting interaction with super smart philosophy, PhD student who was working on her dissertation, and she said, it was a lot of excitement and buzz when I came into my program. And there was like all this sort of like first and second year kind of excitement. Everybody was like, oh, you guys are going to do some great things and all that kind of stuff. And then when she got to be ABD, it just felt like nobody, the way she put it was nobody really cared whether or not she finished and like actually got that done. So that was her experience. And there are lots of other experiences where somebody's got like a dissertation advisor who is just breathing down their neck at every turn to turn in a draft at 11 a.m. every Friday, and it has to be bound. I've definitely encountered that too. It has to be a printed bound draft, even, regardless of how much they've done. So there's a lot of variation here. But it's a fundamental shift, as y'all know, and it's you lose the community structure that the classes provided. If you're not teaching, then you might actually be very like almost estranged from your department at this point, which is interesting, and can be good. It can be helpful in some ways because then you sort of get your priorities right in terms of your own work, but it also can be, again, alienating. Also, there are these like strange, what would you say, complications to the communication that now happens. You need some critical feedback on your work often. At these sort of key times to make sure that you're on track, but your advisor or your committee may have all kinds of other things going on. And they kind of have a longer view at this point generally, where they're not as concerned about, well, if I don't talk to them this semester, they're going to be okay, because they still have another, 3 semesters or 4 semesters worth of work to do here. And then of course, even just the stuff that you're working on is different. It feels a lot different. So common concerns here, we hear from students all the time, from PhD, candidates all the time, who are struggling with some of these committee issues. So this ends up being like as much a social and political kind of thing as it does a writing thing. But we're writing people, and we acknowledge that like that's actually part of the writing. How are you going to possibly focus on writing if you're dealing with like food insecurity, let alone insurance insecurity, as well as adult things that don't really happen as often. It's not necessarily as much a part of the undergraduate experience as it is this sort of later stage graduate experience. On top of that, there's some kind of internal politics that you got to navigate, because there could be like internecine rivalries, but there could also be just normal workplace things that you have to worry about. This person's personality is super strong. This other person, not so much, there's a pecking order in the department and my advisor is at the bottom. What do I do, Anybody have anything to throw in here before we move on? Does this adequately characterize kind of where you are, or are you not in this situation?
I was in a situation, I'm in a history PhD. I was in a situation where I just changed my committee before comps, but I had one committee all thought out, and the office politics nonsense was just getting super, super heavy. So I changed the whole thing. I'm like, I'm not dealing with this.
Yeah, I've definitely witnessed that before as well. Yeah, I mean, like it takes a certain amount of like gumption to be like, no, I'm sorry, you're a big deal, but you're also not on my committee anymore.
Yeah,
I need to move on, Yeah,
you need people who almost more than having people that are particularly knowledgeable about your topic, because once you've written the dissertation, you could be one of the world experts on whatever topic that you're studying. You need people you can get along with, and if that means switching committee members, or God forbid switching departments, some of my education is in Europe, and some of these people have 3 different graduate degrees in 3 different things.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, on the flip side, it can be really disruptive to have to do that, and it can set you like your timeline back and all that. So you have to kind of like balance, how much of this kind of labor do I want to be doing, like negotiating among a committee, the social component, all that kind of stuff, the politics, versus how much is it that I am really invested in this particular project or inquiry.
Yeah.
I've definitely worked with some folks, like I'm thinking about an engineer I worked with a while back who, advisor whose lab, if you're in engineering or a science, like some kind of natural science, a lot of times you're actually applying to get into a lab first, and then the program kind of follows because it's the lab that's the sort of more important thing. So this lady went to go work with this particular guy at a lab. He left to go into industry in the middle of her, dissertating process. So all of a sudden, everything got changed. He was the expert in this particular thing. She had the question of whether or not to change her focus or to try to persist in a field with an advisor who didn't actually have the kind of background that they needed to, And I see that in the chat too. Basically, if you're looking at a department and there's not a particular expert in your field, like not a natural point person to go to, how do you negotiate that? And the very unsatisfactory answer, I think, is, you have to just kind of weigh out your options. And it's helpful to have allies in the field who can help you with that sort of interpretation of, well, what does it mean if I have a non-expert advisor, but I get my dissertation done and my dissertation's awesome, or it's good, or it's solid or something. So these are kind of fantastic and also very difficult questions that I think come up along these sort of committee concerns at this late stage kind of stuff, So here's what I'd like to do. Let's see. Yeah, we probably should go ahead and do breakout rooms rather than a big group, David, if that's okay. Let's go ahead and break out really fast. And we'll do a quick little hello around the room in these little breakout rooms. And I would love it if you guys could discuss one challenge that you've had in communicating with faculty. So try to think of one. I'm sure that you have just a whole repertoire, but just one would be good. So what is it? And then is there something that you did that kind of helped to mitigate or, address that particular problem? And is there some kind of suggestion you can glean out of that we could share? I find that one of the most powerful components of this kind of workshop or this kind of talk is actually just hearing how other people are dealing with their committees, because they have infinitely more creative ideas than I think I would. So David just dropped that into the chat. So you've got that going into the breakout rooms. We'll break out and let's try, let's see if we can maybe at the top of the hour, is it the top or the bottom? I don't know, at 5 o'clock, maybe we can come back and reconvene and have a group conversation.
Okay, everyone, you should have just received an invitation. Please click to join your breakout room. Workshop room PC, you can just talk amongst each other. Oh, okay, you joined, cool. All right, and if you have any questions, just feel free to let us know.
Probably got a rhetorical whiplash, which is, I think, going to be the name of my memoir, so it's fine. Let's talk a little bit about what you found in your discussions, what we talked about as we kind of went through. And I'll see if I can't pull this out of this presenter mode and maybe take a couple of notes. So feel free to drop some stuff in the chat, or I'd love to just hear from group one, if you remember what group number you're in. Something that you shared maybe. I see we still have some breakout rooms coming up in the chat too, like Alessandro was talking about stuff. Would anybody mind sharing with us?
Someone was mentioning that a faculty member in their department was like, we don't think you're cut out for this work. And it's like, well, excuse me, if you admitted us, you assume that we're cut out for this work. Like a little support would be nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like the silliest thing, isn't it? It's like the most harebrained thing. Like, we work to recruit you. We've created this program, and we're like ostensibly supporting you in this because we're instructors and that's what we do or whatever. But also we know that, like, just in general as a population, graduate students are constantly trying to reconcile their imposter syndrome with the fact that they actually have expertise in the way that Paul was mentioning, perhaps the world's leading expert on some subject. So for sure, that is definitely a challenge. What else?
at least in our group, we did also discuss a little bit about the just like utter befuddlement of faculty when we say that we don't want tenure track research positions. It's just how confused anyone it is at the concept that we might not want a faculty job that doesn't exist. And Paul was saying in his field that there's one tenure track job at a research institution for every 600 PhDs being produced this year in his field. So like that faculty just have such a restrictive view of what the potential future looks like in ways that's not helpful for us.
Yeah. Yeah, and that trickles into like seeking like job support, looking for some kind of help through networking or otherwise. Like it seems like, I mean, there's very much this like reproductive component to the academic, what would you say, academic preparation. You're being kind of groomed to reproduce this, you know, tenure track kind of thing that doesn't really exist in a lot of circumstances now. I mean, that's not only to talk about contingent faculty, but also to talk about the fact that there are lots of people who go and work for all kinds of other companies and stuff like that. And it seems like a lot of committees will really help to get you to a university, you know, pulling from their networks and stuff, but not to Google or Facebook if that's where you're trying to go, or some other avenue that's, you know, think tank or not in an academic field. That's a great point. What are some other things that came up?
So I have one that was DM'd to me, and it was your advisor comparing yourself to other doctoral students is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah,
That's pretty bad. There's confidentiality implications all over that.
Yep. Yeah, and like just kind of there are some words that we're recording, so maybe we'll watch it. Yes, there are some definite like ethical and other kinds of very problematic aspects in that. I like the word toxic for that. There's some toxic elements in that. What other things came up?
Some weeks when I meet with my advisor, I feel like I'm on track and I'm doing an amazing job. And then like the next week we meet and I feel like I'm the worst person in the world and I couldn't be doing worse. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is. I've changed anything that I've done. I don't know if other people have experienced something like that, where some weeks it's hot and other weeks it's cold. Is that normal?
I feel like I experience that sometimes as well, but it depends on like reading my mentor's mood, on whether or not they're in a good mood and whether or not the meeting's going to go well or not well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You're very, yeah, I love that. I love so much emotional labor managing advisors' moods. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a super strange dynamic here, or it can get very strange. So there are some people who have really healthy relationships here. There are some people who have very professional relationships here where those boundaries are clearly, you know, drawn, and that's helpful and that's good. And then there are other people where those boundaries get like really out of whack, where it's like there's this like strange, what would you say, like partnership that has like bad marriage kind of qualities, but also like, you know, that sort of management, personality management thing that happens. Communication issues obviously are like really central to that. Does somebody want to add a final one to our list?
There's a really good one in the chat. That sometimes your advisor forgets something they told you and say the opposite of what they told you last time. So I think that's a really good one, because no matter what the relationship with your advisor or other committee members are, good or challenging, that's something that we all might encounter.
So that's a great point. Yeah, and I agree with Catherine here, with Alessandro's suggestion. I'm actually going to add that to the strategy side. Yeah, another version of that is that every time you meet with your advisor, you walk out with like, 3 books in hand that you feel like you have to read before you actually can proceed to the next thing. And that's just not helpful. It's, in most cases. Oh, hey, that's our website. That's not what that is. Didn't copy out of the chat. So let's try this. Oh, recording Zoom meetings. Interesting.
That's fierce, Marina. Like recording Zoom meetings, that's hardcore.
It is hardcore. I'd watch that too, because that could blow up on you, because they might feel threatened by it. But I also think that if they're cool with it, it's a fantastic way of being able to actually have a record to go back to. Yeah, that makes sense. If it's, as long as it's your advisor like is cool with it. Actually, I've worked with some students who are multilingual, and there was one student that I was working with who had a lot of anxiety about asking his advisor questions. And he would actually come to sessions at the Writing Center to rehearse the questions that he was going to ask his advisor. He was a master's student, he was working on a thesis, but he was intimidated, and he also felt like he wasn't fully understanding everything that his advisor was saying, which, I mean, I think that's true of, whether you're multilingual or not. You can easily have that situation. But that whole idea of rehearsing the questions, asking the specific questions, recording the answers, doing a follow-up email to check is a really, I think, helpful kind of pattern to be thinking about. But yeah, recordings would be great in that situation too, for somebody who needs to literally see it again because they're multilingual and they want to hear the exact description.
Okay, I have another thing. It kind of came up in our group, but it's a bigger problem. And even my advisors kind of identified this, that there's no check for an advisor, especially once they're tenured. There's no formal University of Arizona, are you being a good advisor check, to where are they leaving students off the wayside on emails or meetings, or just being a good advisor. We have our exit survey when we leave our program, but that's at the end. It's, wondering how it was when it's all over and you're devastated or something. And we've had a few people on my cadence. It's been about one graduate student leaving the program per semester, which I think is kind of a lot. I think it's less than in the past from what our director just recently told us, but yeah, there's no check on advisor. And I'm in the College of Science, and the new dean, she had a graduate student meeting 2 weeks ago, and it was me and one other grad, like no one else showed up, but she listened and she agreed that the College of Science doesn't have that. And they thought it was a good idea. And maybe that's just a bigger University of Arizona problem, not just College of Science, but how do we get an advisor check on being a good advisor?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think University of Arizona is just like just like lots and lots of other universities out there with that there is no formal training, there is no, accountability as far as that goes, except for within the department and any kind of some mentoring that might happen in the department. So yeah, I agree with you. That's a really interesting and productive place, I think, to ask questions. And I think, frankly, for people like GPSC and others who would have like the weight of graduate students writ large to like address, I think that's fantastic. I do think for those of you who are assembling committees, this is really good to know, right? That it's not just about looking at the credentials, but also asking around a little bit and using the benefit of people who are, preceded you in earlier cohorts to see if you can do a little bit of personality research on how this goes, that might be a useful step to add into your process for selecting a committee. Same goes with the sort of intercommittee communication that can happen, seeing if you can't tease some of that out before you even get involved in it. What other specific strategies came up, things that you either do or you heard somebody does or you think would be a good idea to implement to kind of help with some of this stuff?
So there was one that came in to direct message to me, and I have found that the best chair is someone who is a big student advocate. So in terms of a best practice, finding the person that would best advocate for you, or at least listen to your responses and work with you.
Yeah, it's smart. If you're not already in a situation where you've selected a committee, that's a great thing to be thinking about. Who's the student advocate? In what ways do they advocate? What's their idea of advocacy? Is it that they want to set up a very professional, structured kind of relationship, that can be really good for some people? Or is it that, like my advisor, for example, I knew that she was like a lot more laid back than that. And I knew that I was going to need my own timeline for developing out stuff. And so I did not sign up for the person who was going to help me structure and fix my life. I signed up for the person who was going to be more gracious in making sure that I had the time and support that I need. So yeah, I totally agree. There's different kinds of advocacy here, but yeah, being attuned to that is a phenomenal idea. Any final strategies that we can add to our list? Cool. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I had a similar issue where my advisor was kind of comparing me to the other grads in our group, and I just approached that other grad and I said, "This is kind of weird." And he said, "Yeah, this is weird too." He comes from a physics background, and I come from geology, and so our advisor really was making him do all the physics things and then making me do all the rock things, and it was like, well, we want to be able to do both, and like, I don't know. So I just talked to him. He said, yeah, he just thinks I'll make a plot and I know how to do it, and that's not the case, and like it's unrealistic for me. So that felt good, at least just to talk to the other students, to be like, we're getting like kind of corralled and compared in weird ways. But yeah, it created that solidarity where it's like, oh, we're not crazy. This is just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think in so many different ways, the idea that like some of the advisors like very much have a very pressing set of influences or concerns that surround them, because we all do, because we're all busy and everybody's doing stuff, I think is really a good realization. But understanding that being able to coordinate outside of that, that you have power to be able to do that to some degree. And some advisors, I think, would respond negatively there. So you have to feel that out. Like, is this something that I'm able to say, like, well, we got kind of coordinated, we figured out how to redistribute this kind of labor or whatever. Is that going to be something that's going to be viewed as initiative, or something that's like an affront to, somebody's idea of what kind of power they have or whatever. And I think that's a part of this like navigation and negotiation. But I love that, the idea that ultimately when some students come in and say, this is the way we want to do it, I think there are lots of people who respond pretty well to that, because they're like, well, they're taking the initiative and they're leading like we're trying to get them to do, These are great. We have some more here to add here in just a minute, but I think this is great. So we'll pop back into the little presentation mode here. And these will be like on the saved version of the presentation. So there we go. All right, so we're going to go to this next one if it'll let me. My computer's thinking real hard. So this is consonant with what y'all were saying, basically. But here are a couple of specific strategies you might think of. Some of these are over the top for some advisors, right? You wouldn't want to do it, but take what you want. Staying in touch with your advisor can happen in a lot of different ways. Some people are feel comfortable being able to text their advisor, or they're connected in other ways aside from formal emails or formal meetings. I've definitely encountered some situations where an advisor runs a center, literally wants the only interaction to be a weekly meeting where each student has 10 minutes or something to be able to tell them what's going on, with their whole work and all their life or whatever. So this staying in touch is a matter of trying to tease out what is the most effective way to communicate. I'm really awful about getting snowed under in my inbox. I'm not a dissertation advisor, but just in general, because I'm doing other stuff, right? So it's hard for me sometimes, because I'll have like a lot of emails that I'm not going to be able to get all the way through. So if I've got a staff member who needs immediate attention, they know to get me on one of these other platforms. Like previously we've had Slack, now we have Teams, which is kind of the same thing. So having this conversation upfront is super helpful with your advisor. How do you like to be, contacted when I need something that is urgent, or when I need something that's quick? And then also trying to be respectful of that and not overtaxing that particular relationship, I think is helpful. Another way to do this is to actually have like meetings where the whole point of the meeting is not to where you're reporting to them on something, but actually where you're working through some kind of concept or some kind of thing, showing them specific data, specific charts or whatever that you need to kind of work through. So this reasonable boundary thing works both ways, right? One of the kind of situations that I'll never forget is a woman that I worked with who was super well published as a PhD student. She's a biologist, studied lizards. And she was like, had this really cool internship opportunity at like Smithsonian or something like that, or something really awesome that was going to be amazing. But like, as we got to talking, it came out that she actually rents a garage apartment from her dissertation chair. If you're not currently in that situation, please don't get in that situation, because you definitely do not need daily interactions where you're like, hi, I saw that you were up late last night. Must have been fun. Where's your dissertation? You know, where's the next chapter? Like, setting up a set of boundaries is helpful. And I think that goes to that question about how to stay in touch with your advisor. So if you don't want to receive texts, maybe you don't pick text message as your source of communication with that person. Set up boundaries, maintain the boundaries. You know, you can maintain them more or less overtly. You can say, I don't want to text because I don't want to text with my advisor. Or you can say, yeah, I don't respond well to text. You know, I don't respond to text messages very frequently or whatever. So maybe we just email. So here's that suggestion that came up earlier. You can actually have like an email correspondence that you send out in advance that kind of primes them a little bit for the conversation that you'd like to have. So what this is doing is it's positioning you in this like organizing kind of position, but it's also giving you the ability to set the agenda a little bit. And of course, they're going to have their own thoughts about what they want to talk about, but this kind of primes the meeting so that way you're already talking about the things that you want to talk about. And then I like this last one because it speaks to a situation that I've certainly experienced. Most of us have experienced a situation where we didn't finish whatever it was that we felt obligated to do, that we set up the deadline for. But it sort of builds if you don't keep these meetings and report to them that, yeah, I wasn't able to do that for these reasons. Life got in the way, whatever happened. Like, there are definitely judgments that happen with this, right? They're gonna, you know, we all risk the idea of being judged like, yeah, like that person's personal life is taking over and they're not getting the work they need to done. That said, you're not gonna really find a way to necessarily get a whole bunch of work done to make up a bunch of ground that you've passed previously. And having that mindset is a kind of negative mindset to have in this kind of marathon. If you've ever run a marathon, one thing that's almost impossible to do is really make up a lot of time after you've kind of hit the point of exhaustion, or after you kind of hit the point that you don't really have much more, right? It's really hard to try to make up time late in these kinds of things. And I think that's the same thing with this. It's a long marathon for us. So you want to make sure you protect yourself a little bit by trying to be fairly straightforward with where you are in your progress. And if you don't meet a goal, then you need to acknowledge that. I love the idea of sending the email afterward as well. And so you're having this kind of bookending on the meetings. And it sounds like more work for you, but what's more work, sending a couple of emails or having to like retrace the steps of like how you came to this decision and then now this person's kind of flipped it on you, you know? Yes, I love that point, Paul, about having a lot of organizational power. So, David, did you have a thought?
Yeah, there was a DM that came to me that I think connects to all of this, but especially reasonable boundaries. And the DM is, if you have communication with your advisor through an informal form, such as Facebook Messenger, that could hurt you later, since you may discuss things through that form that probably should have been through an official email. But then this is kind of a question too, like if you need to know or show that they said something, is it still valid through an informal communication? And I think that sort of speaks to what's a reasonable boundary for communication and when can you bring that in.
Yeah, I love that question. I think, you know, I'm old school and would prefer not to be on social media with anybody that is like, unless it is a curated professional profile, which I definitely know that people do that too. They say, I'm a sociologist and my Facebook page is going to be my sociology Facebook page. So every time I go to a conference, I'm going to connect with people there. I'm going to take pictures and everything. It's not going to be like, you know, my bar photos from the weekend. It's going to be my bar photos from the conference or whatever, you know. So I think that's interesting. And having that chat record is, you know, always helpful. But I would say too, like, I appreciate the sort of defensive awareness there that you might need to have a record of what was said. That said, hopefully the way we're striking this balance is we're trying to bring them in on a kind of conspiratorial kind of, you know, what would you say, a conspiratorial demeanor rather than one that is as antagonistic as needing to say, well, you said this is what you said, you know. The more that we can do to cultivate that, I think, interaction where we're saying, I'm asking you this question. I know it sounds dumb, but I know that you know, I can trust you to like, to let me be vulnerable in this spot and not know this thing, because ultimately I'm going to in part bear your brand here. You know, I'm going to be a part of like, you know, your genealogy here from now on as an academic genealogy, you know. The more that we can do to cultivate that kind of relationship, I think the better it'll be, and the less antagonism that we'll have to like bring up evidence, you know, oh, well, let's go to the recordings and this to prove that this is what you said, you know. So that's not a direct question or a direct answer to that, but I do feel like in terms of overall sensibilities, that's important to, you know, to keep in mind. I think a simple way of doing that is to develop fairly early, but you can always develop it later. This like this asking clarification questions and restating. That restating is really key. If you can kind of develop like sort of attune yourself to the way that you can restate what your advisor just said, so that it doesn't necessarily sound like you're like checking for you know, you're going to nail them down and, you know, checking for this verification, but it more like an earnest, I'm really just interested in what you said, you know, in terms of clarifying and restating. I think that's huge. I've worked for people like this, like as bosses, you know, where by the time you get through the conversation, they've sort of gone back and forth 5 and 6 times, and you just need a kind of final, you know, okay, so what I'm understanding is you're green lighting this project because you think it's got some merit, even though you've got some questions about these other things. Does that sound right? I worked for a long time as a reporter, a news reporter, and that was another thing we used. When somebody said something that was particularly provocative, and you wanted to like write the quote down, I'd always make sure that like, what I hear you saying is this, just to make sure that they were going to actually be okay with me printing that the next day, you know, and standing by it. And it's like, well, shoot, I verified it twice, you know, what more can I do? Cool. So let's talk a little bit about process, how this needs to go. At the end of the day, we actually have to write a thing, don't we? Isn't that weird? It's not just managing all the personalities. It seems like a full-time job. So here's some questions, you know, people ask frequently. Also, if you've got other questions about these kinds of things, drop them in. Let's see if we can talk about it. But yeah, what's a reasonable timeline to complete a dissertation? And then how do we need these chapters to come through? What do they need to look like? What do the chapters actually need to look like? What are the parts? Do I need headers? What kind of citation style do I need? And then of course, like, how should I actually do this? How should I write? When do I write? So ideally, an advisor would be the perfect person to ask all of these things. You could learn some wonderful things about how they professionalize as a writer, somebody who produces quality writing frequently on demand. You could ask them about, you know, reasonable timeline, and they would have a nice system for, well, yeah, it's going to take you 7 weeks to write this chapter and whatever. But unfortunately, the reality is that what's a reasonable timeline? I don't know. It ranges from like people writing these things over the course of like 1 academic year through 10 years, basically, when they are right up against the deadline for the duration of their programs. So it really can be very, very broad and unhelpfully so. So these are the kinds of conversations that I think are actually less useful as like searching for a particular answer, and more useful as a conversation that helps to set the expectations or coordinate expectations, manage expectations between you and your advisor. So if you were to ask these questions of your advisor and then like have a nice conversation about, you know, how long they thought a particular piece of work should take, I think that'd be really productive. It'd help you understand something about how they see this process happening. The same thing with the order of submitting chapters and how to do that. Heather, I think you had that question about negotiating different, you know, kind of strong-willed faculty members too. One thing that could be a strategy here has to do with using questions as a way of kind of figuring out what your advisor thinks of this, pulling that your advisor in a kind of conspiratorial way, like, how would it be best that I present this to this other person who we both know has a different kind of perspective on this, and still, you know, be able to kind of meet the expectations that you have. We have to remember that the only really finite or definitive thing, I shouldn't say finite, but definitive thing here, as far as a measure of how acceptable your work is the opinion of your advisor and your committee, right? So trying to wrangle that is a very ambiguous kind of thing. So welcome to a game where the points mean nothing. There are no definitive answers. It's all about, you know, what looks like it's anthropological enough, historical enough, sociological enough. Does this look like something that is sociology to your advisor or whatever your department is? I'm reading Paul's comment here. This is interesting. So this is an interesting comment. So Paul's making some, you know, comment here and about the abilities of your advisor as a writer and what the expectation, Paul, that you have of that kind of interaction. I would mention this. We surveyed a bunch of faculty, we being a group of writing support people on campus. We surveyed a bunch of faculty, and we asked them what they think good writing is. And we asked them some other stuff like, where did you learn to write well, basically? And the overwhelming answer is generally, well, I had an advisor who taught me how to write. And that's really interesting because when you drill down to it, it's again more like a genealogy than it is like any kind of systematic understanding of how writing develops or how we should maybe teach writing and stuff like that. So there are lots of different ways of trying to like teach how to write, right? And the problem with that is it's difficult for all of y'all here in this room to find commonality across the methods that your advisors are going to be using, because all of them may be saying things like, well, we need to write clearly and concisely, but like what they mean by that ends up being, you know, this manifold kind of definition. So it's a fascinating thing, and I love that if you are aware that your advisor is a good writer, and you have that communication set up where you feel like it's a productive communication where they're able to give you feedback that's meaningful and useful and good. Wonderful. You're lucky. You're super lucky. And I agree with you on your comment there. Cool. So I'm going to pause for 2 seconds for questions or anything here and to take a sip of water. Does anybody have any questions or additional comments about their experience with this?
I hope I'm not the odd man out here, but I keep asking my department for like just where to start with the dissertation. And, you know, they'll say things like, oh, well, there are different formats for dissertations. There's this, and this kind. And I can't actually find like, here is an outline of a dissertation, get started. And for me, that's the biggest problem because I'm not quite sure where to start. And when I ask that question to the faculty members, it reflects horribly on me because that's like, well, where have you been the last couple of years? What are you doing with your life kind of thing?
I'm so glad that you said that. Yeah, it's what would you say? Racket is the wrong word. There's like trick. There's some kind of trick here that's funny. It's like it's an ex nihilo trick that you got to do, where it's like, I've never read one of these. I don't know where they are or what they look like. There is no outline, and it really depends on what my committee thinks, you know? So here are a couple of starting points. If you change your question to a question like, do you have a dissertation? Do you have a dissertation that you've approved recently that you think is a particularly good one? That's a helpful thing to start with. In the libraries, like all these university libraries, they usually maintain a database full of, like, you know, dissertations basically. So if you go and you look, and I forget exactly what the one is on our site. I forget what, it's a major publisher that does it, LexisNexis or something like that. But if you go to the library site and you start filtering through the search terms or whatever, and you search just for dissertations, you can actually search by the advisor. So go look at 5 or 6 of the previous dissertations that your advisor approved. The trick is, when you read them, many people come to start reading those looking at the content, like what are they actually saying, what are they studying? But the real key here is actually the way that they have it structured. So kind of work your way backwards, reverse engineer from 4 or 5 examples. So look at them, kind of skim through them, look to see things about, like, well, do they have sections? What are they treating? You know, how is this kind of going? And then exactly what's happening in the chat here. Basically, like, start with that kind of an outline, that kind of understanding, your notes, and then go ask them some specific questions. Like, I noticed that in this other dissertation, these people have these sections. Is that something that you think my project would demand? Or should it, yeah, ProQuest, thank you, that's the one. I couldn't remember who the publisher was. If you're your advisor's first student, go look for either your other committee members, or a lot of times if it's a faculty member who's kind of new to a department, they have some kind of more or less formal mentor. Look to that person, because that person, a new faculty member is going to come into a situation going like, yeah, I know I need to be like advising this dissertation, but I don't exactly know what all the parts are. So they're going to ask their colleague, mentor, or whatever. So go look at that person and look at the dissertations that they have. So the issue is, they do vary just incredibly across the disciplines, but even more so and more confusing is they actually vary tremendously within the discipline. So in my discipline, for example, literature, right? Because I'm after all the big money. In literature, we've got stuff that looks a lot like a social science kind of structure, where people would potentially put together 3 separate articles that are framed with like an intro and a conclusion. But then we also have the monograph dissertation, which is a lot closer to like a book. You have an introduction and then chapters that sort of elaborate on certain aspects of a theme. Scientific, natural science, engineering dissertations, vary tremendously as well. In a lot of programs, they really want you to have publishable things at the end of it. So the dissertation ends up being a repackaging of published material, or a repackaging of work that can be published. So having that as a starting place, some questions that come from like having looked through a couple of examples that came out of your department, gives you a kind of ownership of it that allows you to ask questions that are other than, how do I start? Where does it sit? Because it's going to be very, very, very unlikely that anybody has like a straight up outline to hand you and say like, this is the shape that your dissertation needs to be in. It's the old Supreme Court's definition of pornography. They know a good dissertation when they see it, you know? Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Thanks, David.
Very much. Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, the proposal conversation in the chat. So proposals are good, but proposals are also read with a lot of skepticism, because one of the tasks that happens, or what would you say, one of the movements between proposal and dissertation is this major accordioning that happens. where you start to dig into something and you realize there's more there, or you realize you need to include other things. So I think a lot of committees that I've been aware of, proposals I've been aware of, they read that with some skepticism. They're like, okay, this would, if they did this, this would kind of work. Depends on your advisor. Some people are going to really hold you to your outline, to your proposal. Other people are going to say, well, that's your starting point and just revise your proposal as the project changes. So keep that in mind. There can be different ways of doing that too. Cool. So let's take a look at some more stuff. So let's take a moment to actually meet with each other again. And I would love it if you guys started to have this conversation. You know, the old joke is that, it's not even a joke, the old threat almost is that you should be able to explain your dissertation if you were like trapped in an elevator with somebody for a minute, you know? I shouldn't say trapped, I mean just riding in an elevator. So like having a kind of little an elevator pitch for your dissertation. So let's take about 10 minutes here. And let's talk a little bit about specifics that are related to your project. So what is your project? Where are you in this process? And then let's see if we can't come up with 2 target dates, the next 2, and tasks that you have in your timeline. And this can be about managing your committee, or it can be about this specific writing, just the tasks that you have in on your calendar, basically. So David dropped the information into the chat there. So when you get into breakout rooms, and we'll check back at 5:50. And we'll share a little bit. Idea, again, is that we were talking about our project, but what we were really edging toward was thinking about this in terms of process. So the stuff that we're really interested in here, the projects are amazing, but we're also really interested in how we sort of roll these projects into a set of tasks or other kinds of plans that we can actually kind of carry through. And there are some ways of doing that that are maybe more productive and ways that are maybe a little less productive because they end up being like, you know, anxiety inducing and all that kind of stuff instead of actually helpful. So let's talk a little bit about, or actually being helpful, excuse me. Let's talk a little bit about what kinds of things we were talking about as far as, you know, some of these goals and stuff like that. Does anybody want to volunteer?
It was cool. It was cool from my perspective. The other participant in that room wasn't writing the dissertation, so he was kind of like throwing questions at me. How do you go through this process? And it was cool having that because it's my advisor's probably gonna be super chagrined, but it's the first time that I've really thought through that I had a process, and I do, and my committee is giving me a process to do, but it's putting that in words with another human was kind of neat because it made me realize how many things my committee had kind of thought through. Oh, he's going to need this and this and this. He's actually going to need like regular meetings. No, it's not all that important. Like if one meeting goes bad or he gets some advice from us that we're not if I interpret something wrong that somebody on my committee told me, okay, I'm seeing them again in like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
It's not a big super huge deal, you know. And I was saying I'm kind of the one that's stressing out about, oh, I have to get this done. You know, I have to be getting this project done super fast. And my committee has kind of organized the meetings in a way that I do think they respect that want to be that want to be getting done and defending and going on to a career. But they're doing that in a way that like takes a lot of pressure off of me. Dude, you had one nasty meeting where you didn't really give us anything that we wanted. Put that away now. Like, we'll see you again in 3 weeks. It's fine.
Yeah. There are a couple of really cool thoughts there that I like, that I would add to. One of them is the long view, like having that longer view, and also understanding too that the programs put a lot, like invested a lot into all of y'all, everybody. And for the most part, they want to see that bear some kind of fruit too. So there's definitely a sensibility there in the more reflective kinds of committees where they're able to say, well, shoot, we don't, this is like somebody who has a ton to offer, and like we put a lot of resources into, a lot of time into, a lot of coursework, a lot of, even the comps process and all that kind of stuff. And so wanting to like help that come to fruition, I think a smart committee kind of sees that. Whereas we might see it, we being graduate students might see it as they're looking for one specific thing and I'm not giving it to them. Well, perhaps, but also like it may be that, they're looking for like a range of things that we are still trying, like we're just a little bit too myopic to see right now because we're very much invested in the particular work that we've been working on for the last however many years. That's one thing that comes to mind. So yeah, the idea of like, this is a marathon, a longer relationship that we have, there are going to be some moments that are really challenging and rough and whatever, and interpersonally, and then also potentially some moments where, yeah, we can come back again and try again and continue to work. I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I love Marina's comment here too. We're talking about a lot of stuff being condensed into a really short timeline. Depends on who you are with this one. I'm on the decade-long plan, and so I got my job before I finished my dissertation. We're going to put you on this track where you finish your coursework in 3 years or 2 years, and then you have 1 year to like, do that dissertation, and then meanwhile you need to be doing your job market activities, is kind of nuts, but like a part of life for a lot of people too. That's like another way that this might occur. So I think, recognizing that the last time I checked in on this data, the average years to completion for a PhD in a lot of larger institutions was something along the order of 7 years to completion, rather than 3 or 4. So that means it's average too, right? We're thinking about like people who go much longer than that, people who go much shorter than that. So just think about this as like, definitely for every situation where somebody comes straight through the program, finishes the dissertation quickly, and like hits all those markers, there are going to be a lot of other folks who follow every last bit of advice. Like they move across the country 3 or 4 times during it. They have 2 or 3 kids. They get married. They make major life decisions, which is, you're not supposed to do that, right? You're just not supposed to make major life decisions in the middle of all this stuff. And yet it happens. So there's that side of it too. Awesome. Cool. And then Veronica shared a chart. Cool. That can help plan events and tasks. Nice. Cool. I've never used this one before. I'll have to check it out. Nice. What other concerns came up or strategies for being able to manage this as a process, this dissertation, this larger work as a process?
I guess it's Veronica, the one that just posted about the chart. If I'm going kind of off of what I just posted, the concern with that this could be the strategy, but the initial concern would be I have all this stuff I have to do, tasks, meetings, whatever else. But I know that it needs to be on a timeline, like we're saying. So this chart, or some people use Excel, some people handwrite it, some people use an agenda to map some of these things out. But like you said earlier, make them flexible. That's a nice thing with like some of these other charts. You can, like a Gantt chart, you put in your progress in like the form of a percentage, and you give flexible dates. You can advise things, like revise things, and put in essentially factors that say, this isn't do or die. This is just, how am I going to get here? What tasks need to be done? And is it doable? it just makes you feel like you're breaking things into smaller parts that are more digestible over time. So
Yeah, I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry, I can't walk and chew gum or type at the same time. So there we go. Yeah, this whole concept of a long timeline has these multiple layers. One of them is the sort of social, political kind of layer. And then there's the actual like writing, getting the thing done. I've got a lot to say about the writing part. Happy to talk to you about that. In fact, we have other workshops that are geared specifically for that. The sort of too long didn't read for those workshops is exactly what you're saying, Veronica, which is take the big tasks, break them into smaller pieces. But the real rub of that particular process is making sure that you match the smaller pieces, or the pieces that you break them into are actual like reasonable pieces to break them into. For example, it's actually rather challenging to say, I'm going to write and finish my chapter 2 in this 1 month or 6 week period, or 2 month period, or 5 month period. The problem is not actually the time, it's what you're saying you're going to do in the time. It's difficult to write a whole chapter because there are lots of different movements in a chapter. And any one of those movements can cause like these problems or other kinds of complications that are unanticipated. So a better unit would be like, I need to finish, this particular component of my literature review where I'm connecting these 2 points of of like literature that I'm familiar with, of scholarship that's out there. These 2 studies, I need to make sure I consolidate them into 1 paragraph or 3 paragraphs or whatever. So in other words, like having like a movement, a smaller movement, smaller unit for your goals is actually really helpful here. Anytime you sit down to write a chapter, it could be that you end up in a data analysis problem or something where you end up sort of digressing and going down this like data wormhole for like a rabbit hole for another month trying to figure this out before you can ever come back to your initial concern, which was just writing, just trying to write through the chapter. It may be that you actually are moving ahead on 2 or 3 chapters at once, and some component is going to keep you from completing a whole chapter. So you need to actually shift some of your work to another component. So having that flexibility is cool, and matching the specific goals that you're building to these like units that actually make sense rather than these more, I wouldn't say arbitrary units, but like a whole chapter is a very unwieldy kind of beast. Does this make sense to people, or does this sound like a weird thing? Okay, cool. Yeah, there are tons.
I was just gonna agree with that, where I thought I was the problem in part of my paper writing right now. I have this August 15th deadline. I get it to my advisor and the postdoc in the group, but then turns out the telescope just wasn't collecting good data in this part of the range I'm observing, and I was really beating myself up like I screwed it up, I screwed up the telescope and like whatever. But it turns out like, as I looked for other publications, which took me down the rabbit hole, and I didn't meet that August 15th deadline, but just to double back on something else you said, like still just keep my advisor updated, that makes him happier, which was hard for me at first because I wanted to make sure I did it, and like beat myself up. But he didn't care if I didn't reach that point. He just would rather me let him know I didn't reach that point, instead of like, as he says, Allison, don't try to kill yourself. So he's understanding with that, and it kind of sucked, but it wasn't my fault that the telescope, it just loses sensitivity. It's actually the atmosphere's fault. So not my fault at all. But he really seems to appreciate, and our relationship has thrived when we are really under that communication, where even if we didn't hit the deadline, like I'm telling him I'm not, and that seems to work out. So at least, yeah, even though it totally sucks, just telling him that communication still.
Yeah, I think there's often the conflation of like the goal that we think they have for us, and then the amount of work that we are actually putting into, like we're not sort of crediting ourselves with the amount of work that we're putting into a particular problem. It's sort of like a lot of us, I think, are used to trying to obscure the amount of work we're putting into something. But here, I think it's actually really useful to say, well, I had to go down this rabbit hole to understand this problem that I encountered. Here's what the problem is. Here was my thought process and how I approached it. Because again, I think most of us are actually putting a ton of work to consider any particular problem, and then owning up to it when we're not doing the work on some, on the project for whatever other reason, and saying, well, it's because, my kid was sick or whatever. And then at which point it's like, yo, I'm a human being, and this kind of stuff happens. So setting goals, super helpful. Breaking these pieces up into manageable chunks that actually, like, sort of, what would you say? The manageable chunk is actually an easier thing to kind of wrap your head around and actually assign a date to that is a reliable date. And then if the date changes for whatever reason, continuing to roll forward with that, set a new goal, try again, see if you can package or repackage that, what is included in that goal, in another way. So that way it makes more sense and is more reliable. That kind of recursivity in terms of goal setting for writing is huge. It's just really, really huge, because it keeps you from finding yourself in this kind of position where your wheels are spinning. You feel like you're just spinning out over any, mixed metaphors there, but where you're sort of spinning out over the smallest little things. Because ultimately what you're doing is you're not setting particularly good goals that are actually attainable. So along those lines, let's pivot to this really fast. Let's talk a little bit more about timelines and planning and stuff like that. So remember, we're thinking about all this in terms of managing our committees, really. But this is also about managing our own workflow and our own sort of professionalization. When I think about writing process, what I think about is a professional person or a true artist or creative person has built a process that is probably very, very idiosyncratic, very unique to them, has pieces of their advisor's process, maybe other things that they've sort of sorted through that they think work. But the yield of a good process is that you can kind of work your way through it, whether you're hungover or whether you're in between houses or jobs or whatever kind of other fringe situation you might find yourself in. Building the process and having a nice process to help you understand what you need to do will also give you some more confidence in the idea that no matter what, if you're adhering to your process, you're going to get a higher quality product than somebody who's just kind of throwing things together, So what we're trying to do here is insulate ourselves from some of those like kind of vacillations that we experience in just by being a human and a person and a professional and an adult. So in doing that, some people really like to notate all these things. What's happening in your academic life, what's happening in your personal life. I think the main thing I would call attention to here is understand it doesn't matter how good you are at writing, if you're not actually able to make the space for writing, you like all this stuff doesn't really work, right? Like it's not just gonna happen. So habituating some kind of writing space and time, so that way you're not thinking of the 10 other things that you need to do, and actually focusing on this. And you allow, I think ideally, you allow some space so that way you don't feel like obligated to do other things in a way that keep you from being able to play a little bit mentally. By play, I mean actually consider what you need to do. Now, not everything that we're doing is playing, of course. When you're writing your, method section or something that you feel is like fairly rote, then of course, we're going to be in a kind of different headspace. The other thing I would mention is we write differently at different times. We do different tasks well at different times of the day, of the year. By now, you probably know this about yourself, whether it's best for you to wake up at 3 a.m. or whether that's just a narrative that somebody told you along the way to make you feel small about the way that you do your own work, because you don't wake up at 3 a.m., damn it, and so you'll never be as good. So understanding, for example, that you work best at a cafe is cool, or understanding that 9 o'clock is really your time, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. is really your time, when things are like, when the coffee's hit sufficiently, but before you kind of fuzz out on too much coffee. These kinds of realizations are really important. You've had a process at this point probably for quite some time. It's just being reflective about the process and kind of separating the wheat from the chaff about, what things are actually contributing to you working well and writing well, and what things are, just nice little additions or little distractions that you might want to have in there. Another thing we talk about a lot in terms of writing strategies and actually writing is to break up, if you're part of the writing efficiency sessions, for example, which is a really great program that happens a lot at the grad center. If you break your tasks up into small pieces, like 25-minute little sessions or little sprints, that can be useful for some people. There are all kinds of apps and other things that people use to be able to do this. But having these smaller little spurts of 25 minutes can actually be really helpful, with the acknowledgement that the organizing and the planning that you're doing deserves its own time frame. So in the way that we do these, they're called Pomodoros, where you break up, your whole work session of whatever 4 or 5 hours into 25-minute pieces. It is totally okay and worthwhile to devote 1 or 2 or more of those 25-minute pieces just to organizing yourself, setting some goals, and allowing yourself the permission to actually engage with getting your stuff straight. That's actually a hugely important part of the whole process, right? And the other thing that I mentioned is rewarding yourself here for even the smallest of accomplishments is super powerful. I've worked with a lot of graduate students, some very sophisticated people, very sophisticated thinkers, who are supremely motivated by putting a little smiley face sticker on their planner because they wrote that day. And you're like, yeah, you're just killing it. You're out there, you're able to do the academic all-star stuff and the smiley faces that are Pinterest worthy. So good for you, Chocolate is a really good incentive too, if that's what you're into. One thing I wouldn't do, I like the idea of being able to reward yourself with something that you enjoy, Netflix or whatever. I'm going to watch my show. The thing I don't like, or that I've just based on my experience working with folks, is holding your social life hostage to these kinds of rewards, because you don't want to exclude yourself from a community. Community is really powerful at this stage in particular. So, social restraint is nice, so that way you can continue to work and do your stuff. But also, maybe you don't reward yourself with being around people and then basically find out that it's been 3 years since you've hung out with people because you're a grad student and you don't feel like you're worthy of reward. So setting these goals in a way that's my goal is actually I'm going to sit down and write today, and it doesn't matter how far I get or whether I get through chapter 1 or chapter 2 or just I get a paragraph down. I'm just going to sit down and write, and because of that, I'm going to do my fun social thing. Maybe a better way of handling that. Cool. Do we have any thoughts or comments or contributions here?
I wanted to thank you for saying that about social lives, because I feel like there's so much, well, you're not getting anything done, so you can't have a life outside of grad school. And I think a reminder that a social life and socializing with people shouldn't be seen as a reward for getting done with work. It's just a fundamental part of being a person. So thank you for saying that. That's really fabulous.
Absolutely. I apologize too if I was pronouncing your name wrong. I'm not sure if I was or not. But yeah, no, for sure. Community is hugely powerful. The other part of community that's actually really productive, if you have that kind of productive mindset about things, which is, fine. I think we want to produce things, is that community offers you the opportunity to distill what you're working on in more or less organic ways. That's really useful. And it's something that we would do in a formal context if you were seeking feedback on writing, whether that's in the writing center or whether you're talking to your advisor or committee. But the idea of basically saying yeah, what are you working on? Well, here's what I'm working on, or I've encountered this problem. That whole process of working your way through an explanation is extremely powerful and often will help you to solve a lot of these problems or to think this through in a way that kind of clarifies things. One of the, so there's a portion of the writing process that we call invention, when you're trying to actually put words on a page that are kind of new, or you're trying to get started basically. One of the really fun techniques that you can use for this is to get out your iPhone and hit record and just start talking your way through it. If you've got a partner who is a relationship partner, a romantic partner, husband, wife, anything like that, who's also in academia or is just interested. Talking it through with that person is really helpful. It's really helpful to talk it over with people in your cohort, but just remember that they share a lot of the same assumptions and stressors that you do. It's not the same as actually explaining to somebody who's outside of your discipline, where you have to carry more of the burden of sort of distilling why this is important or how it works. So very often we want to have conversations with people in our cohort because we're like, yeah, you're doing the same thing. Also, though, somebody who's in an adjacent field might even be a more interesting conversational partner for that. So there's like a very productive kind of way, if you like to think about things in that way, there's a very productive component to like having this kind of social interaction or, you know, kind of stuff. That said, just like living life, because holy crap, if you've gone 10 years without actually like living life, what are you doing, right? That's just your life now. Yeah, Netflix, definitely a good reward. I appreciate what you're saying, that like in some ways I can be looking at some internet sites and, you know, Netflix and other things and not actually getting the recharge that I need to. So I like this as like a question mark around Netflix. It's like, are you still carrying the weight of your work even while you're watching? Or is it an actual like escape, or you know, would it be better, you'd be better served by doing something else? I think that's a great kind of thought process. All right. So here's a little thing we'll do, and we're just going to spend about 5 minutes on this, not very long. So this we don't need to break out into groups or anything. We're just going to do this individually. If you could grab a document, so open up a document, Word document or whatever, could be Excel if you're into that. And then let's come up with one task basically that you're interested in finishing on your specific piece of work. And if you haven't gotten to a dissertation stage yet, something like a proposal or something that's another sort of formal step that you've got to get to would be good here. So the idea is we're putting at the top, this is the kind of goal, and then some of the tasks that I need to actually complete to be able to accomplish the goal. And then at the very bottom of the page, so cursor down to the bottom, write today's date. Doesn't have to be the bottom, I suppose. We put some spaces there. And then let's find a midpoint date between those things. So midpoint in terms of the calendar. And then let's spend 3 minutes filling in some of that interstitial stuff. What needs to happen between the completion of these tasks that lead to this goal, this midpoint, and then what needs to happen between that midpoint and the completion date. I'll check in with you in 3 minutes. Anybody else? So another thing I would mention is there are tons of ways of setting up goals. We're smart people. We should acknowledge that these are artificial. We're creating deadlines for ourselves. And we should not shrink from it because of that. We should embrace it because of that, right? That it's not artificial in the sense that it carries no meaning. It's just artificial in the sense that it helps us to parse out these larger tasks and actually think through. It sort of encourages us to really tease out what the sort of fundamental components of each of the steps you know, should be or has to be before we can kind of get there. So another way of thinking about this, just, you know, for grins, is setting up the sort of, it's the duck, 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 goose model that I really like. The 3 ducks are 3 different goals that, like, let's say this week, you're going to set yourself 3 goals. You're going to hold yourself to those 3. And then the goose model, or the goose one, is the 4th goal, that if everything is going really well, this is something that you hope to get done. Whether you use ducks and goose or geese or whatever, doesn't matter. The point is, like, there is a way that we can actually make goals that not only hold us accountable, but also provide us their own kind of reward of having accomplished something that was above and beyond, even though the above thing is, we're making this up, right? nobody like leaned over our shoulder and said, you must get these 3 things done unless your advisor's like that. but no, people aren't telling us exactly that. You know, this is a process where we're sort of out here setting up our own very specific kinds of goals for this larger kind of task. Cool. I should check in about the rewards. Do we have any other kinds of rewards that are fun or interesting? What are the rewards that we're using for accomplishing these things?
I guess it's just like my dog, I use food. Food's motivation. Food's the only way to make him listen, and if I get through something, even if it's just like a long email where I have to attach and do a bunch of things, then I'm like, all right, then you can go get the coffee refill, or I use it to justify expensive coffee. I feel like it's funding my own PhD, but honestly, yeah, expensive coffee and food, like, it works.
Absolutely. Yeah, food definitely motivates, coffee definitely motivates for sure. I think, you know, we're at our best when we're doing stuff like, you know, that we know is going to be helpful in multiple ways. You know, okay, I'm going to work for the next 2 hours on this particular thing, get as far as I can, and at the end of that, I'm going to go take my dog for a walk. I'm going to go for a little run or whatever. Things that like are also, they help like our affect as well as, you know, they provide reinforcement for accomplishing goals. So I think that's cool, but you know, we can't always do that. I mean, like sometimes we have to have like these smaller kinds of things. Like, yeah, I'm gonna get another 3 Cheez-Its out of the box or whatever. I mean, it's all good. You literally just like the dog, you know. It's so funny. I'm gonna give myself the smiley face because I deserve it, damn it. All right. So hey, let's talk about some resources. This is the fun and easy stuff. So there's actually a lot on campus now, which is great for y'all that you can benefit from. The new thing that I was going to mention. So here's what we did. Think Tank has for a long time been open to graduate students. So we've got writing tutors here, right? They're peer tutors. So they're a mixture of undergrad and graduate students. And we train them pretty extensively, pretty rigorously. The way that we train them though is not in any particular field, it's to like provide feedback and how to do that well, really, how to be a really good outside reader. You're going to be the expert in your field. They're going to be able to talk about things like, as a reader, I was reading through this and I noted that I couldn't quite follow between these 2 paragraphs. Is that because I don't know this science or whatever, or is it because it's something that, you know, you could actually elaborate some more? I'd be interested to know, you know. So we do these kinds of things in 3 different modes. We do it in Zoom sessions. We do them in person as an appointment. And then we also have this service called Feedback Loop, where you would book an appointment for a particular availability, Monday at 10 a.m. And you upload a document when you're booking, and then you let it go. And on Monday, when Monday at 10 a.m. rolls around, one of our tutors downloads it, offers feedback in the margins. And that feedback is conversational. It's often asking you some questions. It'll point out some things that they noticed. It's not judgy. It's just they're just saying like, hey, I noticed that you do this like several times. Is this something that you're doing intentionally? When they're done with that feedback, they upload the document again and you get an email that says it's ready and you can go and download it and take a look. So we were always doing that for graduate and undergraduate students with undergraduate and graduate tutors. We've now teamed up with this partnership with the grad college. So the Office of Fellowships and Engagement, and then also the grad center at the grad center. And we've consolidated this into a grad to grad kind of peer service now called the Graduate Writing Lab. So it's physically at the grad center, but it also has those other 2 virtual means of meeting too. So you can meet by Zoom or through Feedback Loop. The major difference here is you're always going to have another graduate student on the other end. If you come to our writing center at Think Tank, it's going to be a really well-trained, smart grad or undergrad. We intentionally make it so that way we're not like specifying which one it's, who it's going to be, because we really use that kind of social norming force to provide feedback. So I'd encourage all of y'all to go, get some feedback from the grad writing lab, because it's going to be a graduate student and they're going to be doing those 3 modes, and it's free to y'all. And it's something we've just started this semester. So take a look at that. You can follow this link when you get this, or you can just you can click through our Writing Center webpage, which is writingcenterarizona.edu. Oh yeah, nice. Thanks, David. And then also WSIP is the Writing Skills Improvement Program. So they're the ones that we've been partnering with, along with the Grad Center, to put on the ABD to PhD workshop series. They've got professional staff, a small professional staff, so people who have already done graduate degrees and stuff like that, who can meet with you. They do some services for a fee, and then some services for free. And they also will do stuff that we don't do, like in the late stages of a dissertation, after it's like been approved or defended, they'll actually do some editing for a fee if you want to, editing and proofreading. And then of course the Grad Center, which is kind of the locus for all this stuff that David so well represents here. So you can come there for all kinds of different links to resources, and they have a bunch of other programs that support graduate students, and some fellowship stuff and some other really neat stuff. Cool. Also, there's some research support over there at the UA libraries. And then of course, remember, there's like some actual social stuff as well. GPSC, the Graduate and Professional Students Council, based our Student Council. And then of course, we've got stuff like, just let's acknowledge that food insecurity is real among grad students. So there's the campus pantry. Also, take care of yourself in terms of your mental health and well-being. So CAPS has actually some dissertation support groups and some other things they've done over the years. So keep those things in mind as you're moving forward here. Also, we just chunked a couple of these. You want to read a little bit about this stuff. Here's some interesting resources to be able to think about dissertations as like, how to manage the project, as well as how to manage your own, yourself actually during the process. And then of course, we've got some other tools like mind mapping tools and things that could be useful. So all this is linked in the presentation. So if you take nothing else from this whole deal, we should probably take this. Let's do what we can to try to keep those lines of communication open, which means trying to attune to your particular circumstance and looking for ways of really kind of, capitalizing on that. And definitely doing the best that you can to be a force of organization for those meetings, because it really, as some of our participants pointed out, it really gives you actually some power to be able to set an agenda for what's happening here and have a little more control in the situation. Same thing with having your own kinds of timelines. This actually makes it where, if you have a very clear set of timelines and goals, it's more likely than not that your advisor will just say, yeah, do that, because that makes sense, because you know yourself and your process. And then one thing that I think is always helpful is to let your goals evolve, and don't, goals are good for accountability, but accountability does not mean self-loathing. It just means, yeah, that didn't work. We need to redesign the system. We're sophisticated thinkers at this point in terms of how to critique and analyze systems. So I think if we put that to use in actually a better understanding our own process, I think we'll see much better results out of that than we will just sort of walking around with a shoulder full of guilt or shoulders full of guilt, because there are so many, we just leave in our wake a whole set of deadlines that we've missed and timelines that we've busted. Instead, redirect that critical power towards, how can I make my process clearer, and how can I understand how I do things well better? And I think that'll be a really empowering thing, I think, for us. Cool. I'll shut up now because I talked for a long time, and I appreciate you humoring me on that, but I will stay after for a few minutes too, if anybody wants to chat about any particular things or otherwise has questions. Thank you all so much for your participation and for being willing to contribute in both the chat and on video, and have a wonderful semester, and I hope to see you at the next ABD to PhD.
I want to say thank you to Nick for your time, and also everyone else's time on the call here. I'm going to drop an evaluation survey into the chat. If you have time today to take it, great. If not, you'll get it in a follow-up email that also has a link to the materials. Again, thank you so much for everyone's time. I'm going to stop the recording now, and if you have questions, you're welcome to hang on the call a little longer. But if you got to go, thanks for being here, and hope to see all of you next month for the next ABD to PhD workshop that is on writing in-depth analysis. So more on that soon. So thanks for being here.